I'm Dean Walker, and welcome to the Poetry of Predicament podcast, a podcast for people brave enough to face humanity's challenges and problems, and most importantly, our numerous predicaments. The Poetry of Predicament is a podcast meant to inspire us to bring forth grace, beauty, and connection with the web of life in the face of a predicament-laden world. This week on the Poetry of Predicament podcast, this is the third in a semi-irregular series of interviews with Seer, in addition to a clinical psychologist and a man of a polymath, and a very dear friend, Dr. Peter Nelson. He's first and foremost, in my mind, a seer, and he speaks in such a way as to give us some of the helping hints, if you will, of how to be a seer in this world, whether you are one or not. Welcome, everybody. This is the Poetry of Predicament podcast, and this is, I believe it's the third one. It may be the fourth one. I've lost count of our what have been wonderful for me conversations with three. I sit corrected. A third conversation with a very dear friend and mentor of sorts. I don't know if he knows that, but I certainly like to call him that. And just a remarkable human being, you know, Peter. I whenever we get to talk about whatever it is, from your favorite music of the moment, which is always remarkable, to your history in becoming a seer, to the work that you've done for quite some time, being in the realm of psychological services for people, and not to mention, I'm sure, many other things that you've worked at in your life. But the stories that I've heard you tell about some of your work history in the regular workaday world also qualify. So this one's the last one that I believe we're going to do for 2022. And I'm hoping that people, I will, of course, put the links to the first two episodes in which we got to do some exploration. And this one, I'm coming with a special request of you to kind of intersect, if you will, with my body of work, which is I'm offering through Living Resilience and this podcast and so on, a whole curated bunch of resilience skills, self and co-regulation skills, ways for people to be able to expand their capacity to be present in the face of larger and larger stressors, which I think is inarguable now that we are in the midst of a massive onslaught of larger and larger stressors in virtually every aspect of life and around the world. And so I'm asking you, Peter, again, I know we just talked about this, but for the benefit of the folks in the audience, I'd like to ask you to share with us whatever you would like to share about how you knew you had a special type of seeing, a special type of perception available to you, and then how you cultivated that over time. Particularly, I've had a number of people ask me about how, if they feel that they're what's sometimes called a highly sensitive person, or an HSP, if they feel that they are in some way extra sensitive to various perceptions in the world, how can we discern signal from noise in this kind of weird zone of seeing, where we don't get the same kind of feedback that we get in the daily world or from our parents or school or whatever. And so we don't have much to go on. And again, this is going out to people who, unlikely that they consider themselves a seer, they may or may not have any aspiration of really getting to scale like that you can share about. So with that kind of rough out invitation, I just open up the floor to you, Peter, and it's so good to see you again. And man, you have the serious, most beautiful background I think I've seen on Zoom, which is a big
Oh,
deal.
well, here I am in northern Canada. Not really, but you could be anywhere now on the internet. Yeah, okay, thanks, Dean. I guess uh, you know I'm known for saying things which uh, kind of don't at first don't seem to be logically correct, and I think if you the first thing you need to do, or anyone needs to do, is to hold on. Okay. First thing anyone needs to do is to stop thinking of themselves and calling themselves a sensitive person,
Hmm.
because that comes with a certain kind of baggage, like, oh, I'm too sensitive for this, or I'm too sensitive for that. And I think resilience is really important, resilience to, for things to impact us and to hit us, and we don't fall over, or we don't run out on it, we don't disappear because, oh, it's just too overwhelming.
Hmm.
Yeah, things are pretty overwhelming, but I really feel that one has to stay present
Yes.
with whatever's going on, because unless you stay present, then you're going to miss a whole lot, and you're also going to respond inappropriately. I
Peter,
think
Peter,
that,
Peter, can I just
yeah,
draw a thread back to our last conversation? It
right,
seems
sure,
like the theme, if you will, from last time was that a seer needs to have an extraordinarily high capacity or threshold for pain, or for being in the
yeah,
presence of very great
right,
difficulty,
right.
pain, whatever you'd like to call it. So I just want to bring that thread back into what you're saying, and I'm sorry to have interrupted, brother.
Absolutely, no, good, good. It was a good interruption because it does connect it, and I the other aspect of how do you know what the feelings you're having, the thoughts you're having, are really anything to do with other than yourself? Well, this is a mighty topic and a difficult topic. I think self knowledge is a basic necessity if you're going to really be aware of others. In other words, you have to parse out your own personal reactions out of what you're experiencing. I give you an example. It was an interesting example. My mentor was this woman in London that I met, and she was she worked at a large corporation as what they call in England a research officer. It's a cross between someone who does background research and is a librarian, etc. And I don't know, I may have told this story before because I've told it so many times, so I don't know where I've actually told it and where I haven't. But it's an important story because uh, it was back in the very early 70s, and there was no internet, there was no email. So documents were sent around London by couriers, and courier would come and pick up a bunch of documents and then zip off somewhere else, or they'd pick some up and bring it in. And this woman that I refer to in my book as Alice, that was actually her given birth name, but her grandfather changed her name later. Anyway, Alice was working for a large firm of international architects, and she was expecting some documents to come in. And the messenger came, the courier came quite late. He came in and he was very frustrated because the traffic had been horrendous and he was way behind schedule. And she very casually said, not meaning to accuse him of anything, she very casually said, "Oh, where have you been?" Which just is a way of saying in England, what took so long? What was the problem? but he took it as criticism and exploded at her. Just a lot of vitriol and anger and frustration from he's the frustration of his day. And I said to her, "Did you get upset?" And she said, "No, he was talking to the person behind me, and she was sitting up against the wall." And what she meant by that is she didn't connect personally to his anger and rage. And as a result, she could be there, be present with it, and see what was happening with him and respond appropriately. What most of us do is we emotionally, our brains are designed to have a major limbic system switch on at that point. And what happens is you come back with fury or fear or but something that resonates with his rage. She knew how to not resonate with it. That's lesson one, to learn how not to resonate with other people's emotions, to actually be able to experience them and take them on board, but not let them actually resonate your system and get you responding on a similar, let's just call it frequency. Because when you do that, your perception is lost until your limbic system calms down, which could take any amount of time from 20 minutes to a couple of hours, depending on how activated you were and who you are, etc. So we're talking about, okay, resilience, presence, the ability to separate yourself from other people's feelings, not to cut them off, not to actually deny or block them out, but not to resonate with them. Now, the most important thing I had to learn over the years was what I would call self-knowledge. We all are kind of a series of internal free associations going on all the time. You walk into a room and let's say there's a blue vase sitting in the room, and you look at that vase and it reminds you of a time or a particular person comes back into your mind. Now, unless you're aware how your associative process works, and unless you have really mapped it out over a long period of time, you could easily think, because the blue vase reminds me of someone I knew in the past, that somehow I'm getting a psychic hit about that person I knew in the past. And what I'm really getting is my own associative memory working. Now, in early stages of developing your abilities, and I won't call it sensitivities, your capacity for reading other people's emotions or reading the psychic tone of a room or whatever. The early part of it is to learn to separate what you're feeling in your own free association internally and what's actually there in front of you. Later on, you can actually tell that something is coming from outside you to in you. Some people can tell, can read that in themselves earlier on. But unless you're very clear about what you bring up in relation to any moment, to any situation, you will always be a mixture of yourself and others. And it will be more about you than anything. And in my early days, because I came from a background that was very science oriented, I, wasn't into any of this. But when I fell into the middle of it, I just went around testing all the time. I did a lot of reality testing. I would literally stop people on the street and ask them very specific questions. And I found if you did it the right way, if you were polite and just asked their permission to just check something out with them, they generally allow you to do that. Not all would. Some would look at you like you're stark raving mad, run away. But I think reality testing is another part of it. Checking on your perceptions so that when you have perceptions that you can't check up on because the data isn't available any other way, you'll have more confidence because you'll know the difference between what comes in and what's just generated internally. Because think of it this way, our whole awareness mechanism is experienced as internal. And even though we know certain things like a loud noise or a bright light is coming from the outside, we have an experience which is how we know it's there. And in philosophers call this qualia. And qualia is the experiential aspect of conscious awareness that's kind of ongoing for us when we're awake. So one really needs to work on knowing what generates your own free associations and what comes from around you. And I was lucky. I had a pretty good mentor who would, we would be someplace and I wouldn't even say anything, and she would just describe out loud to me what I was experiencing at that moment. Not that she was describing my personal experience, my inner experience. She was describing the energetic situation coming from someone else that she was experiencing, and she knew I was experiencing, but she also knew I didn't know how to separate it from me. And that was her way of showing me what was coming from outside as opposed to what was inside. Because as I say, we experience the world, our experiences are all felt as within us, although some are not generated within us, but most are. And so you need to learn to separate that. And
Yeah.
so if you get hung up about being sensitive, one of the problems with that is you'll tend to be trying all the time to put yourself in a position where you don't feel inundated or overwhelmed. And unless you learn how to handle intensity or inundation, overwhelm, then you'll never be a seer, because a seer requires being present dispassionately in front of what's ever going on. And I brought up that initial description that my mentor had to deal with, and she dealt with stuff like that all the time, exactly the same way. She just remained present and impassive, but receptive. And that's the key: presence, impassive, receptive, and resilient. Because you look, I mean, and no one's perfect. I did see her one time react to a situation, but mainly she had really learned, she'd really mastered that way of meeting the world. And that's why I say, if you get rid of the label sensitive, then you're going to get rid of the idea that you're potentially a victim of some kind. Because to do this kind of work, you cannot be a victim. You cannot be either a victim or a victimizer. Both those things will prevent you from seeing. You have to be an open perceiver. An open perceiver, has those qualities that I've been describing. So it's the process of developing self-knowledge. I didn't set out to do that, but I had been through a certain amount of psychoanalysis for 5 years before I ever got into thinking of myself as a seer, or even having heard terms like psychism and seeing. I Before that happened, I had decided when I was starting my education at Columbia University that I was under a lot of stress. So I sought out this guy who was a training analyst from the William Allenson White Institute in New York. And I started seeing him on a regular basis. I mean, 3 times a week. And so there was lots of work done on dreams and the symbolic language we use within ourselves to talk to ourselves about what's going on within ourselves. We each have our own kind of symbolic language. There's
Hmm.
commonality across people within a culture, but really we develop our own unique way, our own unique set of symbols, images, memories that speak to us about what's going on. And Freud brought in verbal slips and things like that. So we're cueing ourselves all the time to how we're feeling, what's being generated within. And as you learn to become aware of that, you can kind of parse that out. When I say parse that out, you can hold it on the side. And that's what my mentor was very good at, just putting that to a side in order to see the person in front of her.
Hmm.
And so if your primary, how should I say, your primary focus is on what's going on with you all the time, then you can't really be a seer
Hmm.
because you're too busy just looking at yourself. It's like looking in a mirror all the time.
Hmm.
It's a kind of primal narcissism that all people develop from infancy, and then you have to learn how to hold that narcissism aside because all of us, our number one concern is ourselves in one way or another. Even when we're trying to help others, we're trying to help others because partly it speaks to us in a way that affirms us, and that's okay. But you have to really become aware of the level to which we all do that
Yeah.
and the level to which you might be doing it. Because unless you do, you'll always be looking in a mirror and talking to someone else as if you're talking about them. And this is one of the real problems I find. Most people are looking in the mirror most of the time, and
Yeah.
they don't know how to get out of that. For instance, I have a rule of thumb. If someone is, wanting to introduce me to someone else and they start telling me all about them, I make sure when I meet that person that all that stuff I was told is flushed out of. I flush it down the toilet because I want to know them directly through a kind of beating of presence rather than what I've heard. I don't look for what I've heard. I just put all that aside. And it's a good exercise to learn how to do it because uh, you know, probably one of the great obstacles for getting along in the world and what's wrong with the world in general is that, we're self-obsessed
Hmm.
and we don't know how to actually make room for another. Even sometimes when we think we're making room for another in our lives, what we're doing is we're feeding a kind of image we have of ourselves to ourselves. So it's very important always to constantly work on knowing what's going on in you and how
Hmm.
to put it aside.
Right.
And that act of putting it aside, I call basically redeploying attention. I take if my attention is curled in on myself and someone walks into the room, my attention has to go off myself and to that other person just completely so that they completely fill my awareness frame. And that's something you have to learn how to do.
Hmm.
Uh, Things can catch your attention. Like if a loud noise went off behind me, there's a thing called the orienting reflex
Mhm.
in psychology, where you immediately go, "Oh, what was that?" And when someone walks in the room, there may be something unusual about them. Let's say maybe they have kind of a somewhat strange-looking face. We have a politician here who looks like Voldemort from the Harry Potter films,
Mhm.
and so you have to, if someone like that walks in the room, you have to recognize instantly, oh, well, he's triggering the Voldemort image,
Mhm.
and put that aside and open your awareness to his presence and what he's doing. Uh, so you can't pay attention to what people are wearing.
Right.
Uh, you know, you could do it afterwards. When I'm introduced to someone and their name is being said to me, I don't hear it the first time. Because I'm blocking out all of that kind of input so that I could be present with the energetic field of the person in front of me.
Yeah.
And I can always ask again, oh, by the way, sorry, I missed your name. And and just they'll tell me their name and I'll get it then.
Yeah.
Sometimes I do get it, but mainly I'm really interested in that moment of contacting their field, what I call their energetic field, and to get the quality of it, get the
Yeah.
nature of it. Okay, that's part one.
Okay, great. I wanna, I'd actually like to come back to the field and that initial contact and so on, so let's please both remember that. But there's a couple of places just a few minutes ago where I missed a couple of words, and one of them was, you were mentioning a few, attributes of, um, a wholesome seeing moment. One is to be present, to be impassive, to be resilient. And I think there
Right.
was one other word. Do you recall what might have been in that
Uh,
stream?
well, impassive resilience and and well, I always think of it as present.
Mhm,
And to be present is to be uh, still and open to the moment,
mhm,
uh, so that whatever is in front of you, whatever is speaking to you, is experienced with minimal of filtering. You never remove filtering. You're a human being with a
mm,
personality. You'll always be filtering. But to give, I guess the way I think of it, presence is to allow whatever it is. If I'm psychometrizing an object or meeting a person, to allow its energetic field to be totally in front of me and my awareness totally on that. And I'm just, I guess I love that Robert Heinlein phrase. I'm grokking it in fullness. I'm just, there with it, taking it on board and noticing its qualities. Without judgment. That's very important. Uh, I can judge it later. I could say, I tell myself, I can decide whether I like it or not later. Right now, I'm just trying to know what it is.
yep,
And most people don't separate the knowing what it is from the judgment. And
mhm,
this is why I also want people to drop the idea of being a sensitive person,
right,
because there's an implicit judgment. This is not good for a sensitive person. And
mm,
it may not be something you want to hang out with, but if you want to know what it is, you have to know what it is first before you decide to not hang out with it. But if it's done as one motion that I'm, deciding it's not good to hang out with as I'm taking it on board for the first time, I'll never really know what it is.
right.
I'll just know I don't want to be around it.
Right. Thank you. I actually would like to come back to the word trauma in just a minute because you've just sparked a kind of an important topic for me these days. But I wanted to check also another word that I think I missed was a word that you were saying if a seer cannot be a victim or a victimizer, that those roles
Hmm.
are defeat the attempt to see or be present at that
Hmm.
level. There was a word that you used for a seer who is, and I want to say the word open, but I don't remember
Hmm.
what you called that seer who's free of victim, victimizer, and other
Hmm.
derogatory aspects.
Yeah,
Do you
I
remember?
think yeah. Well, I was talking about basically being present again because
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that was the issue. It's being present without actually allowing yourself. Well, you have to be still open,
Mm-hmm.
aware, but not judgmental. That's the best way to put it,
Okay.
whatever the word was.
Okay. Great. Thanks. And that's all I have for the going back and picking up pieces here. I'm curious it seems to me in the past 10 years and particularly in the past 5 years, the whole notion of multidimensional aspects of what people are calling trauma are it's really like they've hit the headlines of
Mhm.
the pop psych world, of the
Mhm.
certainly of some people in the counseling professions have really drilled down and offer work around that.
Mhm.
And I'm curious if you have anything you'd like to share or say about how you might define trauma as, because I'm pretty, I would guess that you have seen some traumatized people in your time.
Mhm.
Is that safe to say?
Sure,
So
absolutely safe to
so
say.
I guess what I'm asking is sort of a pointed question. I'm leaning in a direction, which is it's now the word of the day. It's the concept that wants to creep into virtually every corner of our world, from politics to education and on and on and on.
But it's part of identity politics, really. It's
Uh-huh.
part of becoming a victim. Because victimhood in society today has a special status.
Hmm.
If you can be identified as the victim and people will acknowledge you as the victim, you become privileged. And everyone would like to be privileged. Everyone would like to be important and would like to have their specialness recognized.
Hmm.
But it's being done in the most negative, stupid way I've ever seen. We don't want to be special because, we can sing a high C.
Hmm.
We want to be special because we stand out as a group that's been victimized.
Yes.
And and then the victimization gets turned into it's seen in a particular type of victimization. Let's say sexual harassment. I mean, sexual harassment could mean anything, and I'm not denying there's tons of sexual harassment out there. So if anyone wants to get excited about that, don't bother. I mean, it's a real huge problem,
Hmm.
and what I am saying though is uh, it's like the word love. People by love they can mean agape, this selfless love, this divine love. Anything from that to raw lust, and they call it love. And I now see that basically with sexual harassment, you're sexually harassing someone at work if you come in and say, "Oh, gee, I like your shoes." Uh, that could be taken that way, all the
Hmm.
way up to assault, physical assault,
Yes.
sexual assault. And I'm saying when we take on the victim role and when we create a victim role
Hmm.
for ourselves as being special, then anyone who wants to join has to find a way that they're a member of the club. And to be a member of the club, you have to have as many incidents of harassment as possible. So the interpretation of what harassment is has to be, kind of get, how should I say, thinner and thinner in order to include more and more episodes in your life. Yes, we live in a bizarre society, which I would call the baboon brain, because we operate like a troop of baboons with, a sexual hierarchy, with, dominance by certain individuals at the top of hierarchies. And, uh, and, but at the same time, we're not acknowledging our origins in the baboon brain, because until we acknowledge that, and I'm not saying we acknowledge it because say, well, that's the way it is, too bad. No, I'm saying until we acknowledge it and stop just trying to identify certain behaviors or certain situations or certain identities, you won't be able to change it. You have to see how we're wired to be hierarchical. We're wired to have, a kind of a sexual dimorphic set of rules and roles, and that we're not actually necessarily doing it because we're bad. And if you're looking for someone who's good, who doesn't do that at all, well, you're probably going to be hard pressed to find it,
Hmm.
even though some people like to play the part. Uh, Remember the snag, the sensitive new age guy.
You're right. Yeah.
That that phrase that came up way back when. Well, I mean, it's a role people take on. We have to recognize in ourselves, let's say, our sexist attitudes, our hierarchical attitudes, and we have to not say, "Oh, I'm outside that." I have to say, "I'm part of the human scene. I'm descended from those primates that it's so prevalent." I mean, just look at a troop of chimpanzees. I mean, there's only 3% DNA difference between us and them,
Right.
or 2%, something like that. So, and look at them. They do war, they do brutality, they do, sexual dominance. They do all those things. Now, until we acknowledge that we're part of that evolutionary chain, we're not outside of it. Uh, we won't know how to manage it. We'll just either identify as the victim in it, or then get feel we have to see ourselves as the victimizer.
Yeah.
You're neither victim nor victimizer. You're caught in something that at certain ends is very extreme. I mean, there are many men who, for example, will be mildly harassing in today's terms, but it's really a minority who commit violent rape. And I mean, I know that because I used to psychologically assess criminal offenders for the District Court of New
Yes.
South Wales in Australia. And I've seen a fair few murderers and rapists and others who were required some kind of psych evaluation for their court case.
Hmm.
And it's, but it's there, it's part of the population. When you think about it, really, there's always a distribution of things. Most people, let's say, are in the normal range of psychopathy. They could be somewhat empathetic in some situations and not in others. And at the far end of one end of the spectrum, they're overly empathic. They're overly connected to others. And then there's a small group at the other end who find it they're incapable of
Hmm.
empathically connecting to others,
Hmm.
and we call those psychopaths. But it's not like a psychopath is a bad person. A psychopath is actually someone who has a neurological a developmental problem neurologically,
Hmm.
that a part of their emotional brain, their limbic system, doesn't speak correctly or in an intelligible way
Hmm.
to their prefrontal cortex. And we need to identify those people and stop them from being destructive. But there's a part of autism which is also shows that. Everyone's heard of Asperger's syndrome,
Hmm.
and most people don't know who Asperger was. But yeah, he was a German psychiatrist, psychologist who studied autism, and he was part of the Nazi regime as well. When the Nazi regime came on, he continued his work, and so there's controversy around whether we should take him seriously. But I think he made one very good observation. He didn't call it Asperger's syndrome. He called it autistic psychopathy, meaning
Hmm.
psychopathic autism, because that end of the autism spectrum often shows these people show a real lack of empathy or social connection to others, which is essentially one of the prime characteristics of a psychopath.
Sure.
What you feel is totally meaningless to
Hmm.
them.
Hmm.
So if they're torturing you, it's you're just making noise.
Hmm.
Who they don't identify with that.
Hmm.
So I think sometimes people who call themselves sensitive are more toward the empathic end. They
Right.
uh, but that's great, but you have to learn how to manage that, or you then become a victim and you see other people as victimizers because they're not as sensitive as you and they don't pick up on what you're picking up on, or they
Right.
don't recognize that they're running over your feelings. So that's why I talked earlier. You have to be resilient,
Yeah.
and you have to be show some strength. You do.
Hmm.
You have to develop some strength. Uh, I mean, I know people, someone we know in common, who is physically always been very tough and strong, but emotionally is absolutely terrified of any kind of emotional connection. So if whatever your deficit is, you work on building it up. If you have, if you congenitally have, a weak frame, you might go to the gym and try to build it up
Yes.
and get better strength. Or if you have some deficit with learning, you may work on that. And I think if you have a problem with oversensitivity, you have to work on that.
Yeah.
You can use it, but not allow it to run you. And
Yeah.
that's the important difference.
Got it.
You had something you wanted to bring up?
Yeah, I do. It's somewhat connected, or it could easily be connected to what the thread you were on when you started talking about first contact with a person's field, that is a way of
Mm-hmm.
sensing into whatever's there to be sensed.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm wondering if you would just continue that thread where in whatever way you were going originally, but also include uh, someone you and I have both known for quite some time. I'm used to him calling the workaday world out there the wilds. you know, as you know, many of us know, it's like it's far worse than what we see in the physical side of it. Um, I'm curious if you would share some of the energetic occurrences that you see very commonly that if they were physical, they'd be severe violations of the person. They'd be against the
Yeah.
law, they'd be locked up, they'd be considered brutal. I'm just curious because it's that that sensing of that kind of energetics is something that really lit up for me when I first heard about it, and it keeps growing in terms of when you were saying that a seer needs to have a high, an extremely high threshold for pain to be able to just catch these vivid impressions in my system of these um rough interactions is I don't know how really else to call
Yeah,
it.
this
Are there
goes
things
on all
like
the
that that
time.
you see and that you might
Oh yeah, yeah, but there wouldn't be enough jails to put people in, and I would want to do that anyway. I would say that just starting out with the most simple level, that what I see all the time around me is people think they're talking about someone else, and they're just talking about themselves.
Mhm,
That's just all the time around me.
mhm,
Or people making constant paranoid attributions that they don't even realize they're paranoid, because they're just trying to explain the world to themselves.
yeah,
And because they're not really in touch with what's going on, they fill in a story, and the stories are, from my point of view, bizarre.
yeah,
Uh, so I think the number one thing is also the uh, what you see a lot of is projected anger. You know, not even someone acting out the anger; they're
mhm,
just carrying a well of anger, and
mhm,
it's like they're almost like a searchlight looking for something to focus the anger on.
mhm,
And
mhm,
if you give them, the slightest provocation, they'll gladly hand it to you.
right,
So, uh, look, there's a kind of psychic violence that goes on all the time. From my point of view, the way
yes,
people misconstrue others,
mhm,
uh, you know, uh, drop blame, see others as dangerous because they don't like them. And that's the most common thing.
mhm,
Let's say, I don't like your energy, and therefore you're being there with that energy. You're victimizing me
mhm,
somehow.
mhm,
And I think the most important thing is we have to get rid of victims and victimizers, both.
yes, yes,
That you, as long as, one of the things I learned in school, because I was a nerd, right? And nerds tend to get bullied, is when I was in third grade, and two guys decided they were going to, use me for their punching bag. And before they started, I saw it coming, and I hit one of them with a chair. And I realized, hey, I didn't have to play that role.
mhm,
I saw several of my friends playing that role, being the victim,
yeah,
and I didn't have to play that role. And then I discovered something else, that if I projected an energetic field of someone, uh, or it was kind of a field which said, don't fuck with me. Yeah.
mhm,
And whether I could back that up or not didn't matter. 99% of the time, I couldn't have backed it up. And 99% of the time, people just saw that and said, nah, don't bother with him.
yeah,
And so, so energetically, it's like everyone's going around, and they're either measuring themselves all the time against the world, or they're measuring what's out there and whether it's dangerous or not.
mhm,
And it's a kind of, well, it is, where the wild ones are. It is a kind of
yeah, Wild
wild
West,
game. It's Wild West. But there were people in the Wild West who just stayed out of the way,
mhm,
and they didn't get shot or do the shooting. And that's what I'm suggesting.
yeah,
You can, I learned it. I used to, I grew up in New York City, and I spent some couple of summers now and then in Boston.
mhm,
And one of the things I learned when you walk past an Irish pub on Saturday night and everyone's half drunk, don't stare at anyone. Yeah, because they'll be right there wanting to talk to you with their fists. So, and I learned it wasn't
Yeah.
just staring; it was when you stare, you project your field and you call someone else's attention to you.
Yeah.
I can look without staring, uh, and to separate my intentional field from where my eyes are looking.
Yeah.
But we're so conditioned that our intentional field follows where our visual field is
Yeah.
for sighted people. For blind people, it would be different, but
Yeah.
for sighted people, that's what happens. And so I learned how to do that. I could, be invisible.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, someone notices a body walk by, but in terms of the intentional field
Right.
and what the field is, how they're communicating, I wasn't there.
There's no Velcro there.
It was that's right. It's just
Yeah.
nothing. It's just some blob floating by on the street, and
Right.
I,
So, Peter, you've just stepped straight into a really, I think, far more interesting possible thread than I was going to ask about before when you were talking about the encountering a person's field and the various aspects of that and how you might read it and so on. Could you just take us through a little bit more of the anatomy of our field or the anatomy of the kind of dynamic you were just talking about? Because this was one of the first palpable in my system moments when I thought, I'm seeing something here. And I didn't mean seeing in any visual sense. It was just it was literally some sort of sensation or impression on my system that I could feel. And I'm
yeah,
wondering if you could take us through a little bit more of what you might say about what it's like in the wilds to encounter each other's field, or how might I adjust my field to reach more of that invisibility, or to have a bit um, less permeability by choice, or I don't know
yeah,
what the dynamics you might want to describe to us.
yeah. The language I use for this it would only be kind of symbolic, metaphoric,
Hmm.
and because you can't talk about these things directly because we don't have actually language for this.
Got it.
But when I walk down the street, I mean, so this is a metaphoric description. When I walk down the street, my field, it's like uh, I, it's like it's coded and I don't give access, but I can still use it to experience other people's fields.
Hmm.
A real seer would get instant access to me, but I'm not actually uh, how should I put it? I'm not allowing myself to cross the boundary into someone else's field.
Hmm.
I'm noticing what's in their field. I'm experiencing it through my field, but I'm not merging with them. And a lot of people think empathy is merging,
Hmm.
and they should be separated because they're not. Uh, Merging is really where your field boundary is very unformed and it just you tend to mix in with others.
Hmm.
I never mix in with others unless I'm close to them and they're
Yes.
I feel a good friend or my wife or
Yes.
someone that I'm close to. So what I do is my field is like a sensing membrane. As I walk down the street, I'm picking up different things from people. I just noticing them. Now, if I'm really busy thinking about something, my attention is off that. But generally, if I'm not really engaged internally, I'm just noticing different qualities of field. Now, one of the qualities is you can get it's like an emotional tone someone who is soft, someone who is hard. These are all metaphoric terms because no one is literally soft or hard. But most of us kind of know what those metaphors mean.
Mhm.
If you don't, you may be a psychopath. So if you, so what I'm doing is I'm just noticing. Sometimes a particular field is a bit different, so it stands out to me. So I scan further into it, and in someone's field is all kinds of aspects of their lives, including some of their memories. And so I can all of a sudden see that a 40-year-old man walking past me as a 3-year-old
Mm.
and something happening to him. So all that is there and available. It's whether I give it attention
Mhm.
or look deeper. Most times I don't because I don't have time to, and what's the point? Now, there's always been a discussion around this, like about privacy.
Mhm.
What's privacy? So if someone puts on a really beautiful clothing and walks down the street, uh, are you supposed to uh, stare at it, or are you supposed to hide your eyes and not look at it? What do you do? Well, I this is my rule of thumb. If they're out there on the street wearing their field, and I can read their field, uh, I'll notice it is going by just as some woman put on some spectacular clothing and walked by me, and the colors were just spectacular. And I noticed it. I go, oh, but
Mhm.
I wouldn't give it much time. It's just something you notice going by.
Mhm.
Uh, but because person's field and the information that's often in their field, they consider private, and it's not private to me. Uh, well, I don't engage it. I just notice it and move on.
Kind of a
But
seems like a
ju-
similar shift that you were talking about when you walk by as invisibly as you can by the drunk people
right,
outside the bar.
absolutely. I make sure that there's no perturbation in their field caused by me.
Right. I got it.
And it's because when I was younger, I found that was disastrous. I mean, I got into a lot of trouble when I was younger because I didn't know what I was doing. I was completely oblivious to what was causing it because I didn't understand any of this. But looking back, I could see how it worked. So out there in the wild, I mean, some people who feel they're very sensitive, they have a lot of trouble going out in the wild. Some even become, phobic about going out and experiencing the world around them.
Mhm.
And that's why I say you have to have a high pain threshold if you want to learn to be a seer, because it's painful for a person like that to go out in the wild.
Mhm.
But that's what you need to do, because until you go out in the wild, you won't actually be able to learn how to use what you're doing or what you're experiencing.
Yeah.
You'll just be, how should I say, a victim of it, and that's not what you want to be.
Mhm.
Uh, I mean, you can choose. You could be victimized, but whether you are going to remain a victim to that victimizer is up to you.
Mhm.
And there are many ways of getting out from under someone's attempt to victimize you. But we're not going to discuss that today. That's sort of like emotional jujitsu,
Yeah.
or that sort of thing. Uh, so I don't know if that answered your question about the wild, but
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's
it,
great.
uh, you know, I spent part of my training period in a lot of isolation, because when I started to really realize what I was taking in, one of the ways to not deal with it was don't go anywhere except where you need to. Like I go to the shop, to whatever, I go to work. But work is very difficult because here you are, you're thrown together with a bunch of people you probably never hang out with in a million years in a job. And there's all kinds of emotional weirdness going on. I worked as a senior researcher, statistical researcher for a nonprofit for a short time, which was in Point Reyes, California. That's all I'll say about it. And it was the most bizarre collection of wacko people, and navigating through that was really hard. I mean, it was a job. I was being paid to gather data, statistically analyze it, but to be around, and some of these people would just focus their weirdness on you, and would do very strange things. So but you can learn to manage that. And it's not a job I would stay in long term. We took on a project, did the project, and I was gone because it wasn't a place I'd hang out. So the job is really being in the wild. You're really lucky if you go into a job and you're really simpatico with all the people that you work with, or most of the people you work with. That's great. But generally that's not what we experience. We experience a wide variety of people, many of whom we would never hang out with in a million years.
Yeah. Well, I'm getting a sense.
Have we covered the territory?
We've covered a tremendous amount of the territory, and I can feel the envelope closing. And I'm curious, Peter, and I'm out on the skinny branches with you on this because I don't hear you talk about this particular layer of our world very much. But I'm curious if there's anything that a seer might say about the state of affairs of our world. And I guess I'm asking for whatever way that you'd like to answer that, from signals from the earth itself, or the beyond human population, or about global politics for that matter. Any sort of larger scale reading?
A few things I'd like to say. We're not saving the planet when we're dealing with global warming. The planet is probably going to go on for a few billion more years, or until the sun goes supernova or whatever happens. We're saving ourselves. So let's be clear about that. We need to save ourselves. We need to save the biosphere that supports us. And it doesn't just support us, of course, it supports all kinds of other organisms. And that's what we're trying to do. And what I feel most of the time is the kind of psychic emotional message I get from most people who are trying to save the planet or whatever is they are another version of a victimizer. And that is not what anyone wants to hear from me. But I see the same energy that they want to, they want to fix things the way they want them. Now, the people who just want to use the environment up and exploit it, they're victimizers too. Yes. And it's victimizer against victimizer, and both are screaming victim at the same time. Right. That's what I see a lot of. And because they're acting as if either side is acting as if the other side's crazy and doing a stupid thing and ruining it for everybody. And we're being tasked to do something that human beings don't do very well, and that is cooperate on a large scale. We can cooperate to a degree within small groups, and don't forget, we evolved to be, small
Right.
groups of people.
Hmm.
Some of us then started forming larger cities and civilizations, but really our initial life was as small groups, usually genetically related, uh, acting as hunter-gatherers or very simple farmers within their environment. Now, uh, the thing I'm also getting that I pick up all the time is the level of chaos that's it's just
Mm.
every time I scan it, it's just screaming chaos is what it is. And I actually don't see anyone in there or any group in there that's not doing screaming chaos.
Mm.
And that's why I say it's all victims and victimizers
Right.
on both sides. So that's the broad Seer's overview from
Hmm.
my perspective.
Hmm.
Okay,
Thank you very much for
and
that.
and that's what has to be dealt with. That's very, very difficult.
Yeah.
Uh, at this point, I'm just turning 80 years old. I'm sitting back and going, okay, your struggle. I know the younger generation wants to blame us for doing it, but there's no one to blame. This is just how human beings moved over time. They created a particular world. And at every stage, they thought they were, hitting the jackpot. When we started burning coal and heavy machinery, we thought we hit the jackpot because,
Hmm.
oh my God, look what you could do. And you don't even need slaves to do it.
Yeah.
You can move those big stones up and make a pyramid, with steam driven, cranes and things like that. So it's really we need to recognize that we're all in this together,
Yeah.
and and I don't mean just like you and me, Dean. I mean we're all in it together, including my least favorite person, Rupert Murdoch. You know, we're 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 all in this together,
Yeah.
and it's just we're all working, thinking we're doing the best for ourselves, and and long term we're not.
Yeah.
You know, now also I'm in a very advantageous position. I have no children,
Hmm.
so I'm not sweating it like my wife who has grandchildren now, and what's going to happen to them and their children,
Yes.
because a lot of people are thinking that way. Well, that's something really needs thinking about,
Hmm.
but I've just put that one aside because it's enough having to scan the world around me.
Yeah.
But so in one sense, everyone's my grandchildren, and I have to think about that. But uh, I feel I can't do anything anymore.
Hmm.
I'm partially crippled now, and I just can't do anything anymore.
Hmm.
So I'm stepping back, and the only thing I feel I can contribute is my understanding of how to see the world around you.
Yeah.
And other than that, I got no stories to tell.
Yeah. Well, Peter, that's exactly why I wanted to have these conversations with you, because that is no small gift that you bring to the party. And I really want to thank you for this initial series of conversations that we've had this year. And it
It
looks
was my
like
pleasure.
I'll give you a call in December sometime and see how it's looking, that we might do some number more if you'd like.
Yeah, yeah,
We'll see.
I'm open to that.
Yeah.
You just see what works for you, because you obviously have an agenda with your podcast and everything. So
Yeah.
if it works in, I'm interested.
Great. Peter, thank you so much for your friendship and for your participation in this extraordinary conversation. And
Well, thanks for
yeah,
thinking of me when you wanted to do this.
yeah,
It's my pleasure. I like to talk about these things.
yeah.
You
I,
know, to paraphrase or to do a takeoff on a famous film, I like to talk, Ben. Remember?
I do. I do. I do. That was just a little while after he tried to take the TV remote and disappear,
Right.
change the channel of the threatening looking guy he was encountering on the sidewalk.
Right.
Yeah. All right.
Right.
Peter, thank you so much.
Cheers. See you, Dean.
Talk to you
Bye-bye.
later. Bye.
Thanks for watching another episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast, produced by Dean Walker and the Living Resilience Alliance, www.livingresilience.net. Music today from Michael Hedges, as always, and also quote, Blue into the Sea. Also available on our website, www.livingresilience.net, is a wide array of articles, online learning series, arranging group and individual resilience coaching, and sign up for our every other Tuesday free support group that we call Safe Circle Calls.